Hi there, this is Coach Duncan. Hope everybody's still being safe, staying inside, or don't stay inside all the time, but you know what I mean. Staying separate. Um, Today we're going to talk about the marketing research process. There are 5 steps, and to be honest, there should be this evaluation step at the very end. Most business plans have it. I don't know why they left it out of this one. But once you kind of get used to these kind of business plans, you kind of realize you start with where you're at, or in this case, they're calling it defining the problem. And the last one's usually evaluation. So you can see if it worked, and if it didn't, you go change and you start the process over again. They all usually work that way. This one forgets that last step. Anyways, 5 steps here to marketing research. And first, we start with defining the problem. I think last week I made you deal with a website that wasn't working very well, and you had to improve traffic flow or improve customer satisfaction with the website. That was your problem. Um, Maybe there's a jam up in retail lines, and you're trying to figure out why certain areas are heavy traffic and why other ones aren't, and how can you fix that traffic flow. You can define all kinds of problems, and you have to start there to collect the right data. Remember, we're doing research here to fix a problem. And so you have to define the problem so you can get the right data, so you can organize that data, turn it into information, and correct the problem, find out, solve a plan to correct the problem. We just went through all the steps there really quickly. And so the first step is to define it, the question. It just keeps you, Steve Covey, one of the highly 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He said, start with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind. If you know what you need to fix to find the problem, now all that whole plan is going to work better because you know what you need to do. The whole plan is building for this, and so you start there. There are 2 ways to collect data. Remember, we're doing market research now. We're collecting data. Doesn't have to be to improve sales necessarily. It can just be to improve the business. We're collecting data so we can make something better in the business. If we collect that data, and a lot of companies will do a lot of data collection if they can, if it's cheap. If we collect it, it's usually data we trust. Usually, there's still issues with the data, by the way. Um, and it's usually not, if we're doing it, it's probably not very expensive. If we don't have the expertise, if we're going into a new region or a new area or a new industry, or it's just something over our head. This is not what we do. We're here because we build widgets. We don't do market research. You may have to go buy the information. If you buy the information, or even just go collect it, even if it's free, when you're doing that, now you're getting collecting data. It's a secondary data. It's somebody else collected this data. Usually, this sounds bad, but maybe Google has customer profiles so much better than ours, some small company. And so we need, because they're going to tell us what websites, what age, and what sex, and what race, every website. And we're like, okay, that's our customer over there. We need to link with that word or that website or fill in the blank. And so if usually because of expertise, if we don't trust ourselves to collect the data, we will go buy it or go find it at least. When we're talking about primary, now it's data we're collecting. It's usually in survey form. Lots of issues with surveys. And you've taken them and you know, the more you give of a survey, a lot of times the less you get from it. Lots of issues with surveys, but the number one is getting a survey to represent your market. And so you're going to do that with samples usually. Now technology and computers and Google with the search engine they're that might be a little bit different because they're trying to collect all information on everybody. And so that is such a huge um, collection of data to organize. And they're just building customer profiles, so they can access women between 28 and 40 who are mothers or whatever they're doing. And somebody out there wants to buy that data. A company survey that's a primary data that we're doing, we're usually going to do somehow we got an email, somehow we've got their, maybe we're a point of sale, um, and we're going to get their zip codes so we can better advertise to them, or we're going to get their fill in the blank. A lot of times it's a lot simpler if you're doing primary data, if that makes sense. But you might do a customer satisfaction, or that website example is probably a survey we would develop ourselves, send to a sampling, um, which we didn't really talk too much about sampling, but you want it to be a large enough pool to represent your market, if that makes sense. And so there's also some issues about how big that should be, how, and usually cost comes into that too. Um, and you're trying to get your sample to reflect your market the best you can, or you could even break it up in segments, to be honest. But that's, we'll talk a little bit about that maybe in a minute. Um, different ways to get this survey, and they're picking on surveys a little bit in the chapter because that's the one that can be the cheapest. Now you don't have to do it by email. The old school would have done it through snail mail, um, and that would have cost 33 cents to send it. Remember, you're sending that 33 cents is every send, and maybe you get one back 100. That's the problem with sampling. And now you just spent 33 bucks to get the one back. And now, because that was very difficult, they had to put it back into the mail and all that. That one's probably someone that cares, and you're like, okay, that's a good one. Hopefully, it works that way. But that's pretty expensive compared to send out 1,000 emails, get your 10% back. It was a lot easier for them to do. It's a lot less, no cost yet, really. Well, collecting the emails, but let's say I bought those. And now I've asked I know I always pick on wrestling, every wrestling coach, what he needs, what he doesn't need for the sport. And now I have a pretty good list of something. You can do it in person, just really, really expensive. Um, and you could do it by phone, but now you've got that added expense again. Um, all of them, all of them have advantages. Probably the one that is the most cost effective, most used now because of technology, um, is email or some kind of online internet survey. Um, it's still primary data if you want to do like get more personal. The problem with a survey is you can get them to say yes or no, right? You can get them to answer a question, but you don't know what they thought when they were saying yes or no to that question. You don't know what they were thinking or how their day was or how you compare to, maybe they think all retail's not safe, or maybe you think all teachers are boring. And now to tell the difference between a good teacher and a bad teacher, you got to know that you're talking to somebody that thinks all teaching is bad. Well, that matters that a survey just can't know. So if you want to get more in depth, you could do what they'd call a focus group. Could be experts in the area, or it could just be a sampling of your market, some parents, some business leaders from the community, some students, and you just get more in depth into the issue. Remember, you've already defined the problem, and you're just trying to figure out what's really going on. Again, way more expensive for the customer in this case to be involved in that process. So it's much harder. You couldn't have a big sampling of a focus group. It's going to be really small. But if you decided you needed it, you would do it because you want to get in depth, and the survey just can't do that. Another observation, we actually use this in retail, believe it or not. Um, this is not an actual picture, but this did happen to me. That it was actually a real mystery shopper. They'll come in and they'll judge service. They might test your security or your protocols or customer service, just something. And so that is a different way to get primary data, depending on what your problem is or what you're trying to test or whatever. That's just a different way to get to collect data. And then casinos are really good. They have different issues, obviously, but they're collecting data by observing. Um, they want to know people's, not their tells necessarily, but they want to know what's going on with the transactions. Is a dealer good or bad? And so they're just observing to change policies and all that. As a matter of fact, casinos is a big one because this is looking at a table, but they actually watch traffic flow. And I don't know if you know this or not. Well, hopefully you don't. Um, they'll put small like penny slots right by the doors, but they don't have big payouts, but they have often payouts. And so you're hearing this money go ching 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 ching, and they do that on purpose because they watch traffic flow. People come in the casinos that sound like they're winning, and they go to the machines or the sounds. It's actually sound is motivating people. They go toward sound, and so they try to draw you in with that winning sound, if that makes sense. And then they get you into the higher, less winning tables or slot machines. And so they actually have a layout and a strategy also based on observation. It's primary data. They figured it out already. And once you know, you go in there and they're all the same, or they seem all the same. That's how I'll say it. I don't go gambling anymore. I used to when I was younger. Um, Another way, if you is called point of sale. Again, the real simple kind is get a customer coming in so you know they're your customer, um, and now you ask for their zip code. And now you can use that data later when you're trying to figure out what newspaper to put an advertisement in or something like that. That's the real simple and usually how it's used. Cheap, easy, reliable, boom. Because you just want to know zip code hits to buy different stuff. But another good example is the voting polls. And here's another problem with primary data and sampling for markets that the reason I put this picture on here. If you know 40% of your voters are white Democrat women, and 30% are black males, and 10% are millennials, you may just sit at the polls and know that four of them have to be female between this age, three of them have to be black males from this age, two have to be from this age group, or whatever you think your whole market represents. So you're getting an accurate sample. Remember, you can't go ask that's what the election is getting everybody's opinion. That's too expensive. You just want a sampling to predict those answers, if that makes sense. And that's what a voting poll does. It takes a small sample, but they control who they ask. And the reason it's called point of sale is at the voting site. It's a voting poll, and then they try to sample the market as a whole to make sense. And so now you see how they're working sampling into a reliable statistic using very few people, or as few as possible because of the expense. Anyways, when you collect it at the place, it's called point of sale data. And um, businesses, a lot of businesses use that. Obviously, retail businesses would use that. Another one is the observation, which is, excuse me, in my past, we use this as observation, but we also did prototypes. If you remember, I talked about building a prototype. We did one in each zone, East Coast, West Coast, one in Texas and one we called the Southern region. And then we did